everyone. I hope you're well. I hope you've been having great crime fiction reads. The Doctor will see you now, back with you. Thank you to those who are subscribing. And if you're new to the channel, you are most welcome. Hope you stay along for not just the author that we have for this session, but the ones that we might have in future. And you can always dip back and view previous authors as well. Oh my. Well, you know, I love to be hit with a book that leaves me with much to think about. There are stories that we get into that we think, yeah, this is the kind of crime fiction that I love, that I know, that makes me feel at home. And then somebody writes a story that makes you go, oh, I haven't been there. And this is really leaving me with questions as a reader and as a member of society. But I do love that. So I want to say a huge thank you to Victoria Selman, first of all, for writing truly darkly deeply, and secondly, for being here with us today. Thank you so much.
Oh, Jackie, thank you for having me. It's such an honor to be on your show.
A pleasure, a pleasure. So truly darkly deeply, out at the beginning of July 2021, published by Quercus, who always bring good crime stories for
They
us.
really do, don't they?
They do. I have to say, I always have great pleasure when the people at Quercus say, would you care to? And they very rarely have to think twice. And the same happened for this. For anybody who's not familiar with Victoria's writing, she was shortlisted for the CWA debut dagger with Blood for Blood, 2019.
That's right. Yeah, a long time ago now. Pre-COVID. Can you imagine the time?
Those halcyon days where we used to gather at will with no thought. Yeah.
Masks were for doctors and nobody else, right?
Exactly. And then we can, and well, yes, the question of the mask and should we be putting them back on? But yeah. You have a series, and I will ask you a little bit, if I may, about your series, but our book under examination today is a standalone. And I will ask you, because I always love to know how authors feel about, you know, the thing of having the series, very familiar characters, and then, you know, going into uncharted territory where we'll never go again, and how that feels.
You know what, you're right, because it is uncharted, isn't it? And for me, that's one of the great joys of actually having written a standalone, and it's my first standalone. So you're right, I wrote a series prior to this, the Zeba Mackenzie series, and there are 3 books in that. And you get very comfortable in a series. You don't have to think hard about your character. Well, you do think about your characters, because characters should grow and progress, of course. But the groundwork's already been done, and you've created their world. So you already know the board that you're moving your pieces around, and that certainly makes it a lot easier. Whereas a standalone, you're doing that completely from scratch. You're creating a universe, and use the word uncharted territory. And that's exactly how it feels, because you're an explorer in that respect. You're setting sail. And I always plan my books, actually. So I do know where my stories are going. But what I say to people is I don't always know the pit stops along the way. So it's a bit like that. You get to explore, you get to have the thrill of discovery. And of course, to do something completely new, which is such a treat for a writer. You're telling yourself a brand new story, and that's always fun.
And that's how you felt when you were creating and developing this story. Yeah, it was a joy to do. I mean, I know there's always a wrangle with the book.
There wasn't.
Really?
You know, I completely agree with you, Jackie. And normally that's absolutely the case. And there's always a point in a book where you're like, oh, you know, is this working or whatever? This was the first book I've ever written. First of all, I wrote it so fast. It was completely done within about 2.5 months, which I'm sure there are plenty of writers for whom that would be very slow. But for me, that's very, very quick. But it just, I don't know, it just flowed right out of me. And I wrote it during lockdown. I wonder if that's one of the reasons it flowed. So, of course, in lockdown, we were all cramped in our little our boxes, weren't we, in our little environments, very claustrophobic time. So for me as a writer, sitting down at my laptop every day was like opening a window onto another world. I could step into somewhere else. And maybe that's why I wrote it so fast, because it was pure escapist pleasure in that respect.
Yeah.
Although it's not a pure escapist book, is it?
I was going to say in no way.
No way.
I'm not sure that one would want to be transported
No,
to
I
certain.
don't think so.
But I take your point, and I think it's very interesting, isn't it? I mean, we are moving hopefully away from that time, but I do wonder, with all its difficulties and restrictions, was it a time for authors, many of whom are used to sitting down, and that, that lone furrow with the book, it wasn't so strange for them. In fact, because we all had to be quiet and contained,
yes,
maybe other distractions that might normally be there for authors, maybe they were removed in a way.
Well, Jackie, that may be the case for other authors. It was certainly not the case for me.
What happened? What happened in that time?
Well, I have 2 children and a dog, and I was homeschooling the boys. They were both doing different sets of exams, and I was trying to coach them through that. And maths was a part of those exams, and maths is not a part of any part of my brain, so it was very difficult. And actually, the sad thing is, of course, my dog died as well at that time as well. Thank you. It was heartbreaking, properly heartbreaking. So there were multiple distractions. And again, I think that was the joy for me of opening the laptop when I could, it was a break from that, actually.
And something that you could control as well. Yeah.
That's very interesting. I hadn't thought of that. When everything was out of my control, the story I was in control. Yes, I think that's brilliantly observed.
As much as that, and I really do believe this, that for me, I know it might be a strange way of thinking about things, but I believe that the books we receive are stories that are wanting to be told, and that authors are conduits for those stories. Now, of course, it's how the author shapes and forms. But yeah, to make those choices. But I'm going to come back to you a little bit later on this, because you mentioned about pit stops. You plan the journey, A to B, but what happens along the way. So we'll come back to that in a minute, if we may. Yeah, because I do wonder, I do like to ask again, for anybody who's not familiar with the author that I'm talking to, we mentioned, you've been shortlisted for the debut Dagger, but how was it that life brought you to this truly darkly or deeply darkly world of noir?
Of noir. Well, I think let's have a look at what the book's about, because I think that's probably the answer to the question.
Oh, come on, yeah.
So for your viewers who don't know the story of Truly Darkly Deeply, in a nutshell, it's a serial killer's legacy, and it's told through the eyes of his daughter, who 20 years after he's been locked up still can't be sure whether he's actually guilty. And the book opens with my protagonist, Sophie, receiving a letter from prison from this guy, Matty, saying he's dying and he wants to meet. And so, of course, will she possibly get the answer to the questions that have been haunting her all these years? Will the truth set her free, or will it bury her deeper? So that's the fundamental premise. But of course, from that, where we really go, I mean, it's a serial killer thriller, but it's a serial killer thriller with a difference, because there's almost no blood in the book whatsoever. I mean, the crimes happen off the page. You hardly hear about the crimes.
And I would like to reiterate that. There's somebody I'm very close to at a book club I attend who finds blood and gore difficult to read, and it was this I really enjoy. It's a book that you can pick up without fear of coming across that kind
very
of
much so
torture porn. No,
I didn't. And you know what? That's absolutely the right expression, torture porn. I hate it. And it seems to me too often that novelists glamorize serial killers, celebrate them. And I didn't want to do that. So what I wanted to do was look at the effects of a killer on those close to them. So really putting the victims front and center, and the victims not just being the people who were murdered, not even just being the families of the people who were murdered, but actually the families of the killer, because they're victims too. So that was really what the book's about. And how does that relate to me was your initial question.
Yes,
And
yeah.
I guess what it is the story is told in two timelines. So you have the past when my protagonist is a child, and the present day when she's looking back. So we're seeing what happened, and we're looking at it through a retrospective lens. And what you're seeing as you read the book is how it's affected Sophie, and how she can't trust because of it, how it's impacted her growing up. I mean, in many ways, it's a coming of age narrative. Not a coming of age anyone deserves, certainly, but
Yeah.
but it is. And I think how that relates back to me and why it was a story I wanted to tell, maybe even without realizing, because I think you're right, so often the story calls to us without us knowing why. It's just there somehow in our unconsciousness, and it comes out onto the page. But I've said to you already, I'm a mother. I was with my children, and as a mother, what I'm always thinking is, how are my actions affecting my children? And particularly at that time in lockdown, we were so worried. I'm still worried about the impact of lockdown on them, on their mental health, on you know, their general development, how it might affect the social interaction growing up and everything else. So those questions, in a funny way, I think do come into the book. And okay, my husband hopefully is not a serial killer. He's certainly hiding it very well if he is. But that doesn't, sorry, it's my dog barking in the background. She's saying, no, Daddy is definitely not a serial killer.
Daddy's a good egg. Yeah, no,
that's a good egg. Don't you malign him, Mum. But those questions of what do we do to our children? What is the effect of our actions on them? There's something I think about, and I think they come through as well through the story here.
And I really appreciated, you know, because you bring Sophie and her mum, Amelia Rose. How do you say her name?
I say Amelia Rose.
Amelia Rose,
yeah. You want to say it works.
They come over from the States, which I thought was an interesting element to bring as well.
Yeah.
So, you know, so that outsider pair,
exactly,
having to navigate a very different world.
Yes.
I was intrigued though, you mentioned the 1980s, and whether the 1980s was a special decade for you, that so therefore it was a joy to write this. You know, why the 80s, not the 90s or the 70s? What was it about the 80s?
Well, I'm giving away my secrets here, but I was a child in the 80s, so I grew up in the 80s, and I think it therefore it was a time of particular poignancy for me. But also in the book, the period is also a metaphor for whatever is happening in the novel at the time. So, for example, and this is not a particular spoiler, but we look at one point at the royal wedding. So I think that Sophie and her mother and actually this Mattie character, they're all watching the royal wedding. Now, we all know, of course, the truth behind the fairy tale of Charles and Diana's wedding, don't we? And yet nobody at the time knew that. It just looked like the most extraordinary, like a fairy tale. I mean, that's what it looked like. And similarly, the relationship between Amelia and Mattie looks like a fairy tale to begin with, but then the rot begins to show. So everything that happened at those different points in time, there was a reason, as well as being nice for me from a nostalgia perspective. It was also meaningful within the context of the book as well.
And I think again, one of the really strong points of the book is the idea of Sophie's perspective then and the now of the 2000s. How we change and develop as people, how we perceive things when we're little and what that means. I thought that was a beautiful way, and it wasn't just an adult, because I think we constantly change and evolve, but the changes can never be as great, I think, as that from childhood to adulthood. And I just wondered, with Sophie, that sense of, was the points in the 1980s, were there points where life was okay, because struggling with being an outsider, speaking a different English in a different school system, was there, again, is there any point where you give her a little bit of respite?
Yes. And of course, we know that, don't we? In a novel, you can't just have tension, 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 tension. You've got to have the quiet moments as well. So what I'm trying to think in terms of the 80s, what were the rest like? Well, I had fun. So things that were on at the movies at the time, or the music that was being played, or even the foods. I mean, the different food we had back then. I mean, Baskin Robbins was around the corner when I was a child in the 80s. And so Baskin Robbins is in my book. And that was just a little treat to myself because my dad used to go and get me ice cream from there.
And here's one of the interesting or tricky things about the book. Because Matty's not her biological dad, is he not?
Correct. So
and yet there's a bond between them.
Yeah. Well, you see what it is. So Matty is her mother's boyfriend. So it's the boyfriend that Amelia Rose meets when they come to London. And he very quickly becomes an intrinsic part of their lives. So he becomes a father figure to Sophie. And Sophie herself doesn't have a father. So we don't actually ever properly find out what happened to the father. But all we know is he's not in the picture anymore. Something's happened. He's no longer around. And it's a time, I think the 80s as well. I think things are very different now, possibly. But in my book at this time, Sophie really feels that absence very keenly. She sees all her friends at school who do have fathers. She's an outsider. It's another point of difference. There's a scene, I think, where they're all making Father's Day cards and she doesn't have a father to make one for. And it's not just upsetting for her, she actually finds it embarrassing as well. So here comes Matty, and he fills that role for her, and she loves him, and he treats her wonderfully, and she adores him. And there's a line in the book, I can't remember now actually properly, but it's something like, he took me to this and that and the other, and yet he's supposedly a killer. And it's just that difficult. It's said much better in the book, I hope, but it's this idea of trying to balance the person she thought she knew and loved with the person he or may not, because of course she can't be sure, actually be. And it's that struggle that she's been dealing with for the 20 years after he's been locked up.
Yeah, and I think, again, one of the moral dilemmas that you give us is how we should react as readers, because very often in so many cases, it's like, well, surely they knew, why didn't they report this person?
Yes.
Why couldn't they see it? Why, I remember in the TV series The Fall.
Yeah.
Why didn't the wife know that he was out and about of an evening?
Yes, it's the question. It's the constant question. It's what we all ask, isn't it? And that was in my head too,
And the holding responsible of these people is so unfair.
Yes. And yet it's, as society, it's what we do.
Exactly. And that's what I loved. Thank you. Because again, this idea of a book that says, now, wait a minute, because what would you do?
Yes.
Well, are you faced with these people? What would you say to them? Would you condemn them?
Yes, that's absolutely right, Jackie. And one of the things I do in the novel, which I particularly enjoyed doing actually, was it's interspersed, as you may remember, with blog posts and podcasts.
I was going to ask you about this. The choice to do this, because you could have just written the story and had up the narrative and beautiful, but no, you stop along the way. What was your purpose in this?
To do exactly what you've just said. So doing that, I'm almost presenting the reader with the information, and they are having to make decisions. So it's not just what they're being told through the narrator's voice, but here you go, here are the facts. What do you think?
Yeah.
And it comes back to your point as well. What would you do in their place? How would you judge? Would you judge?
Yeah.
How would you have reacted if you were Sophie? What would you have done?
And it's really hard, isn't it? Because I can't believe that this is you, or that this might be you, because I've, the person that I've been close to has been so wonderful. There's been no signs. You've never shown me that side of your character.
That's absolutely right. But also on top of that, and going to the blog post side of things, it's, if you remember, some of them are saying one thing, that he's guilty, and others are protesting his innocence. So it's not cut and dried. And these blog posts, by the way, come out after he's been incarcerated. So it's not cut and dry, and it's almost getting the reader to play judge a little bit as well, I think.
Yeah, definitely. And getting us almost do the exercise of, weigh up,
Yeah. Yes.
don't be quick,
Don't be quick
or
to judge.
search the details,
Yes.
and yeah.
Exactly. But also it taps into the true crime element. So true crime is something I love. It's my guilty pleasure. And this, of course, is a part of that as well. And one of the things I love about true crime is the armchair detective side of it, not just that it really happens. So you can actually, it's not just some fantastical story you're hearing. But so the blog posts give that sense of reality. It makes it feel like, hopefully it makes it feel like this actually is a real story, but also it sort of puts it into that different arena as well, I hope.
So I read that in your time of study that you also that you looked at criminal profiling and criminal psychology.
I
Yeah.
did. Yeah.
So do we, in this fabulous book, do we get the benefit of those studies in this?
Well, I hope you do. I mean, there's not in my old series, it actually centered around the criminal profiler. So she was very specifically the detective character. In this case, I hope it comes across more in terms of the portrayal of the different characters. And actually, Jackie, I have to tell you this because I was so utterly thrilled. Are you presumably sorry, I say presumably just because I like it doesn't mean everyone else does. Do you enjoy Mindhunter? Is how I should have started.
Yes.
Okay, I also enjoy Mindhunter. It's one of my absolutely favorite books, and I binge watch the show on Netflix and love it more than anything. And its author, Mark Olshaker, read Truly Darkly Deeply, and he wrote to me and he said, "This is first rate. It had me all the way." And I was dancing around the room because actually what that meant was I ticked the criminal profiling box. I'd got it right on the psychology front, like, okay. But also my hero had said well done, and that meant the absolute world to me.
Yeah, I think there is, isn't it? There are certain people that when they give the thumbs up, it's like,
it means everything. That's exactly it.
Glorious. Okay, if we could just go back a little bit and talk about the relationship between Sophie and her mum. How would you describe that to people on the verge of going into the book? What should they expect?
Well, it's a relationship that is developed over a period of time. So we open the book and Sophie is 6, and by the end, when Mattie is incarcerated, she's 12, and in the present day, no, I can't remember off the top of my head, but I believe she's in her 20s, or maybe she's 30 in her 30s. Don't hold me to that. I told you maths was not my strong suit. Let's gloss over that slightly, shall we? So obviously any relationship is going to evolve over time, and as a person is changing, so too the relationship will change. It starts very much with before they meet Mattie, with Sophie's mother being her world, and when Sophie and her mother move to England, she is literally her world because she knows nobody else. And then Mattie comes into their lives, and suddenly he's a force that separates the two of them and has them both vying for his attention. And you have that dynamic therefore changing. And then as that begins to evolve, Sophie, of course, comes not quite into her teens, but she's growing up more anyway. So you have the inevitable drifting apart that happens with children and their parents at that age. So the relationship definitely changes. But I would say Mattie is also a part of that change. And that's, for the book's perspective, in many regards, that's, I think, the crucial part of the answer.
Yeah, it's something that I found a little bit I found that a bit difficult of a read.
In terms of uncomfortable?
Yes. Because that idea of, the bond between mother and daughter. And I totally take your point that, as we grow and develop, we rebel, we no longer, want to like the same things because we want to form our own personality. But I think that thing of when the wedge is driven by someone else. And we, the reader, see what's going on.
Yes, exactly. It gives that uncomfortable feeling, and it should do. I mean, it's this idea as well of what he's doing to them. So I said they were victims, and that's all part of the way that they're victims. And home is a safe space. It should be a safe space. And yet he made it not so safe for them.
Not so safe, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And again, you know, the layers that the book presents us with, you know, the evil that is happening outside
Mm-hmm.
and the unpleasantness on the inside.
Mm-hmm.
You know, as you say, home should be a place where we feel okay and we feel
Yes.
safe, and it was troubling. So
Yes.
which is
Yeah.
good. That's good.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. It's good that we should do that. Um, I wanted to ask though, because we mentioned about how certain people write the serial killer with relish,
Mm.
treating them as if they're some very special being
Mm-hmm.
that we should almost respect because of
Yes.
the way they do.
Yes. Yes.
I thought it was brave of you, you know, because, you know, to write a story around a serial killer, you know, in the times we live in, that many a reader will say, I don't want to go there.
Mm-hmm.
Were you conscious of the choice that you were making, that it could be tricky?
I was very conscious I didn't want to celebrate the killer in any way. And that I wanted to shine a light on the victims, and I wanted to put them at the center of the stage. And I think too often, not even just in crime fiction, actually, but in our own world, we forget about the victims.
Yes.
And in fact, there was something I read recently, and I think it was a Catherine Ryan Howard book. And she says she has a lecturer giving a true crime lecture, and he says, hands up if anyone can name a serial killer. Everybody in the auditorium puts their hands up and they can reel them off. I'm sure we could too. And then he says, okay, put your hands down. They do. Now put your hands up if you can name any victims of serial killer. And almost no hands go up. And I don't think that's unusual. I'm not sure how many victims I could name compared to how many serial killers I could name. And I'm ashamed of that, actually. It's not right.
It's interesting, isn't it? Wow. Yeah, that is something that I've not stopped to think about, but it is so true.
Mm.
Yeah. Why is it that we don't, it's almost like we don't care?
I think it's that we are blindsided by the evil. We're so fascinated by that we forget that there's other parts of it. So Jack the Ripper, I mean, everyone around the world has heard of Jack the Ripper, but not many people wouldn't be able to tell you about the people he killed. Hence Hallie Rubenhold's book, of course, which sort of attempts to balance that. And I thought that was brave. And I thought, you know, that was absolutely the right approach. And it was a sort of, I'm not writing about the actual victims. I'm certainly not writing about the crimes, but I knew I didn't want to celebrate the killer. And that was something I felt very strongly about.
Yeah.
And ultimately, it's an emotional story anyway. It's not the killer's story, it's Sophie's story.
Quite. And again, thank you for bringing us back to that, because as you say, it's that coming of age story.
Mm-hmm.
It's being at a place in your life where you take stock.
Yes, absolutely. And how has it affected you? And how, if it has affected you, how do you move on? Because of course, as a good novel, a novel I enjoy reading anyway, is going to have a resolution. You're not just going to leave the person in the dark place. But how do you move on from that point?
Yeah. Well, we'll let readers have the joy of finding that out for themselves. But having written it, before we go on to any future thing, do you mind if I indulge? Just show that, right. So this proof came through, and look at this. So you have to open it up. It's so beautiful. And whose idea was this, Victoria?
Well, unfortunately, it wasn't mine. I have the design imagination of a gnat. It was Quercus. I mean, they have a brilliant design team. I mean, look at this cover. I mean, this is you can see it up on the wall, of course, as well. But let me just zoom it in a bit for you. I mean, isn't that utterly beautiful?
It is.
David Headley, my agent, and I were having lunch, and we received at the same time an email from my editor Steph with the attachment of the cover on it. And normally, as you know, you go through various different iterations of covers before you hit on the one. And we both opened this email up and our jaws fell in sync, and we were like, wow. And it's not just that it's beautiful, because it is, but it's pitch perfect for the book. And
it is. It is, because that rose, it's just slightly on the turn, isn't it?
Yes, and the thorns and if you look at let me shut up again so people can see, but the way it's can you see the way the leaves are sort of weaving around the lettering,
Around the letter, yeah,
and that sort of strangling effect of the leaves and the thorns on it,
yeah,
and it shows the sort of the darkness within something beautiful, that
isn't
there's
it?
something on the outside, but what else is going on behind the scenes?
Yeah, because that, I mean, that archetypal symbol of love, the red rose, and all the joy and all the delight and pleasure
Yes,
that should bring. But the sad truth is,
yes,
no.
exactly.
Yeah, yeah.
Yes, it's
And
suffocated. And
yeah,
actually,
and sorry, I was going to say the strap line that I have here, which I think is great. He's a monster, hated, reviled by everyone but you.
Yes. So and what I love about that, and again, I mean, this took one iteration. I mean, can you believe it? But to my mind, again, this is utterly perfect, because not only is it is putting Sophie front and center, but actually it's doing more than that. It's literally forcing the reader into the protagonist's shoes.
Quite.
Which I loved.
Exactly. And again, so okay, fabulous tale, really good. But I do think you've served us up, or the universe has served us up, a big question.
Yes.
Of how we, and I've said, I said this before, but of how we, the reader, should consider situations like this. You talked about our fascination, and definitely, and I wonder as well, is there an element of it wasn't me? Phew, I have escaped from the path of evil. I am still and is there that? But I think the book takes us to a place and says, but what if you were?
Yes. And it could have been you. I mean, Sophie, there's nothing extraordinary about Sophie. She's not, I can't think of an extraordinary scenario off the top of my head, but she's not, in an environment where you would expect it to attract. She's not some prison officer's daughter who is going to be, I don't know, maybe that's stupid as well, but there's nothing about her circumstances that would expect that. So actually, she's very ordinary, and therefore, yes, it could be you.
Little thought about geographical choice, simply because doing it this way around rather than the other, of them coming from the States, from Boston to North London, as opposed to the other way around, and thinking the number of serial killers found, in the UK as found in the States. So why did you choose to do it the way around that you did?
Well, I guess one of the answers, and it's the easy answer, is I'm from North London. And that, I was literally writing an area I know very, very well.
Yeah.
Another side of that is it's actually specifically set in Hampstead, which is, I don't know if you're familiar with it, but it's this very charming area in London where it's this beautiful high street, which is almost villagey in feel. It's quite shishy. Very, very charming. And to me, that was a perfect setting, because it was a foil, both a foil and a reflection, of course, to Matty, who is very charming, but possibly, and we don't know until we finish the book, a serial killer. And I think what is always important in a novel is to have a very strong sense of place. I was thinking about this the other day, actually. I mean, place is so often a character in itself.
Indeed. Yeah.
And if you get the place wrong, the book can be wrong. It has to reflect the psychology. So I was actually thinking about Wuthering Heights. I was thinking something about this. I said, Wuthering Heights set in Leeds, for example, would not have worked, would it? I mean, would not have had the same, but had to be on the moors.
Yeah.
And to me, maybe because I'm biased, because I know the area so well, but there was something, and the small, although it's London, that villagey feel
very much so,
kind of creates that slightly more claustrophobic environment, which of course is what I wanted to achieve in the book as well.
And an area, one of those areas of London that, as you've said, there's a sense of everything is perfect here.
Yes, exactly.
From taking a coffee to a bookshop, to finding the latest, gadget for the kitchen, it's all there, and it's all beautifully presented.
Yes.
and yet behind it, you know, in the
Behind it.
story. Oh,
Yes, that's exactly it, isn't it? And Hampstead is a place in this. I mean, it's a character in the story. So it's exactly right. It's exactly what you're saying.
Yeah, because to have done it the other way, to have sent, you know, two English women, women to the States would have been, I mean, that would have just been, you know, like we might have seen this before, or it would feel too familiar and too obvious.
But also too big. The States is big. And you know, I wanted this small stage for Sophie and Amelia Rose and them to be outsiders. And I think it's funny. My husband moved to Florida when he was a child, and he had a really tough time. He had an English accent, and he was really he was bullied in school and everything. That actually came across in the book, didn't it?
Yes, definitely. Yeah.
But I think now things have changed, and I think the States are much more Anglophile. And actually, I suspect Sophie and Amelia Rose might not have had quite such a hard time in that regard if they'd moved over.
Yes, I think they would have been the beautiful exotic other, you know.
Yes,
so,
yes.
Yeah.
But as I don't know, just it seemed different this way around. There's a sort of snobbery sometimes with.
Do you know that this is fascinating, because 2 interviews ago, I was talking to Mark Edwards.
Yes.
Yeah, No Place to Run, and he set his in Seattle and North California, and I asked him the reason why, and he said, because of the space.
There you go.
Because I needed the space, and I've got goosebumps now thinking that. And you said I did North London, I did Hampstead because of the lack of space. Yes. I needed that. Yes.
Well, there you go, Mark. I'm the same way.
Yeah. And again, you know, if anybody's watching or listening and thinking about, I'd love to write a crime novel, always bear in mind the location.
So important.
So important. Yeah. But because certain aspects, you know, could be so easily lost or seem out of place.
Yeah.
If that's not done.
Yeah, and the story can literally. I won't bore you with this story I'm writing at the moment, partly because I'm in the middle of it, and I'm not sure quite how I would even explain it. I'm at that stage.
Yeah.
But again, the place is really, really important, and this time I couldn't set it in London. The story wouldn't work in
London.
Allow.
Yeah. And I'll come back again to that thing of stories are wanting to be told. And maybe they know where they need to be told as well.
I think that's right. I think you have to listen to your instincts, actually. And to be brave. Sometimes it's hard. I mean, this new one is set in the States, so that's harder work for me, obviously. But it has to be there. I mean, it wouldn't work elsewhere, and you just have to realize that, I think, about the book.
So have we said goodbye to the Mackenzie series? Are you done with that?
Oh, you know, I don't like to say goodbye. I'm not very good at goodbyes. I don't know. I think let's say we're hitting pause on Ziba Mackenzie, but there's always another story in me, and at the moment I'm really enjoying.
The one now is a standalone again.
The one now is a standalone, yes. And also has a true crime element. So
yeah, again, just to say, you know, readers, viewers, listeners, that element of Victoria's writing is so enjoyable. Those details. It's congratulations on what you've created.
Thank you.
Yeah. I have one last question, because I'm aware of the time, and I don't want to.
I'm just enjoying this so much. I could talk to you all day.
I really appreciate, you know, authors, how they open up and they share about things. You know, it really is almost like a forensic moment on the novel. But what if you could tell us, because you also do the work that you do on Crime Time FM.
Yes.
Yeah. So you're not just an author, but you're somebody for whom crime fiction, you know, it means something, you know, that body of work, the community. Yeah. Tell us about the work that you do with Crime Time FM.
On Crime Time FM. Well, this is a new podcast platform that we launched, a year ago or so now, in fact, and I do it with Paul Burke and Barry Forshaw, and we each have our own shows on it, but we come together for a show called Heads Together, where we have a good old natter about the latest in crime fiction. Paul has interview shows, so they're called In Conversation with Paul. No, they're not. They're called In Person with Paul. So I'm rubbish at PR, clearly. And he does one-on-one interviews. And actually, he's just interviewed me. So that was great fun. Really enjoyed chatting to him. And I have a show called On the Sofa with Victoria, where every fortnight I talk to a panel of household names and rising stars, is how I bill it. And we discuss, it's lovely. And we discuss trends and themes in crime fiction. And I've had some wonderful guests. We've talked to, let's see, Jeffrey Deaver, Lisa Jewell, who did I have on recently? Alex Michaelides. In fact, the Mindhunter, I was talking about Mindhunter to begin with, and actually in time for publication day, which I believe this will be aired our interview will be aired just after that, so it will be live now. I have an interview with Mark Olshaker, the author of Mindhunter.
How can we find that interview? What do we need to do?
It's very easy. All you need to do is type Crime Time FM into Google and iTunes or Google or Spotify, whatever platform you like, and it will come up. And actually you'll see a whole menu of all the different interviews and panels, so you can choose what you like. But
wonderful.
My interview with Mark Olshaker will be there as well.
That will be really interesting, because I think what I love is that, you know, interviewers come along and of course they have their perspectives, and so, you know, I'll be tuning into that, see what he brings out.
Yeah, I would love to hear what you think.
Yeah. So, Truly, Darkly, Deeply, if there were one thing that you as the author would like us, the readers, to take away from our reader, and then this might be difficult, but what would it be? What would you like to leave us with from this read?
I think to be sensitive, probably, that other people, that the stories we think we know aren't always the stories that are really there, and there may be more going on than we think.
Wow, that's quite a big thing. Yeah.
You could hopefully also just take away that you enjoyed it. That would work for me
too.
No,
but I love the thought of that. You know, let you know, allow my writing to give you a different perspective, give you a great read, to keep you hanging on and what, but also just have a look at yourself as, you know, as a member of society, and how you feel about things.
I think so.
Victoria, has been an absolute pleasure and delight.
Jackie, thank you. And I was just going to say, I should have checked this with you first, so I hope this isn't naughty to ask, but I have a copy of Truly, Darkly, Deeply here. It's a nice hardback, which I have not yet signed, but I could sign. And perhaps one of your listeners might like to win it. So maybe if they, I don't know, we could think of some reason, some way there could be a competition.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. Let's do this thing that we will ask people who watch or listen to our discussion, what can we ask them? We need to
I'll tell you what we'll ask them. Let's make it a little bit lighter, because we've gone in very deep.
We have rather. Go on then.
How about let us know what your favorite 80s song is, and Jackie will pick a winner at random.
Oh, fabulous, fabulous. So please, on the YouTube channel, okay, in the comments, please, your favorite 80s tune, and we'll pick the winner, and there'll be a signed copy of this tremendous novel winging its way to you. Should we do it like that, Victoria? Does that sound good?
Think that sounds perfect, Jackie. And the deal is they have to let me know what they think of the book afterwards.
I think that is a very, very fair deal indeed. Indeed. Well, you know what you need to do. It just remains for me to say thank you, everyone, for watching, for tuning in. And Victoria, all the very best. Truly, Darkly, Deeply, and wherever that may take you.
Thank you so much for having me, Jackie.
Speak again soon, yeah?
I hope so.
Okay, bye for now.
Bye.